The echo of crystal reverberated through the hollow corridors of Obsidian Drift, a long-abandoned space station orbiting a dim red dwarf star. The sound emanated from Alara, a lone Xylosian whose translucent skin bore intricate crystalline patterns that emitted a soft glow and produced melodic resonances whenever she moved or experienced strong emotions. This unique characteristic had made her an outcast, feared by other species who believed her crystalline echoes could disrupt thoughts or bring ill fortune. Obsidian Drift had become Alara's sanctuary and prison. The station was a ghost of its former self. Frigid metal hallways, withered hydroponic gardens, and the constant whistle of cosmic winds through tiny fractures in the hull. Here, Alara lived a solitary, self-sufficient existence, repairing ancient machinery, harvesting the weak solar energy, and avoiding the rare ships that strayed into this forgotten sector. Deep inside, Alara harbored an overwhelming loneliness, masked by her fear of rejection and harming others with her resonance. She had grown accustomed to watching other beings flee or attack at the first hint of her crystal echo. The isolation had become familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. Until today, a violent crash shattered the silence of the station, sending vibrations through the metal floors. Alara's skin pulsed with startled light, chiming softly in response. The station's feeble silent alarm flickered weakly in warning. Something had collided with the outer section of Obsidian Drift, not far from her living quarters. Alara's instinct screamed at her to hide, to retreat deeper into the shadows of the station. Yet curiosity, or perhaps just the desperate need for something to break the monotony, propelled her forward. She moved with practiced stealth, consciously dampening the resonance of her crystalline patterns. Following the echoes of the impact, she discovered a small, crudely designed human vessel embedded in the station's hull. The ship was badly dented, wisps of smoke curling from its damaged engine compartment. Through the cracked viewport, she could see a human man struggling to free himself from the jammed cockpit, muttering curses about navigation systems and gambling debts. He appeared to have suffered minor injuries. His clothes were torn, and his face wore the mask of exhaustion, though his eyes remained sharp and alert. Alara observed from the shadows, debating whether to reveal herself. It had been so long since she'd interacted with anyone. The last encounter had ended with the traitor firing a pulse weapon at her in panic when her resonance had unexpectedly intensified. The memory made her crystalline patterns dim slightly. The human finally managed to force the cockpit door open with a metallic groan. He stumbled out, grimacing in pain as he tried to stand upright. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye, and he cradled his left arm gingerly. Alara remained hidden, but the human's head suddenly snapped in her direction. Had her resonance given her away? Had he heard the faint chime of her anxiety? "Hello," he called out, squinting into the dim corridor. "Is someone there?" Alara froze, her resonance quickening with apprehension, creating a delicate, barely audible melody in the stillness. She could retreat deeper into the station, disappear into the labyrinth of corridors she knew by heart. But something in the human's voice, a lack of hostility, perhaps, made her hesitate. With a deep breath, she stepped forward into the faint emergency lighting of the corridor. Her crystalline patterns pulsed softly with nervous energy, casting prismatic reflections on the metal walls around them. The human's eyes widened in surprise, but Alara noticed something unusual. There was no immediate recoil, no instinctual reach for a weapon. Just open curiosity. Are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft and melodic, interwoven with the subtle crystal echo that was part of her being. The human winced, tried to straighten up. "Relatively speaking, except for my beloved ship now looking like a tin can stomped by an elephant and being stranded in the middle of nowhere. This is Obsidian Drift," Alara explained quietly. "An abandoned research station." She hesitated, then added, "Most people, they're afraid of me. This echo." She gestured to her skin, the crystalline patterns vibrating slightly. The human studied her for a long moment. Then his lips curved into a genuine, if tired, smile. Afraid? Honestly, I'm more concerned about freezing to death or running out of oxygen than some pretty lights and sounds. At least it's not boring. Alara stood motionless, stunned by his unexpected reaction. The crystalline patterns on her skin flickered with confusion, creating a discordant chime that reflected her emotional state. "I'm Reese, by the way," the human said, extending his uninjured hand toward her, then wincing and withdrawing it when a movement clearly causing pain. "Alara," she replied, her voice barely audible beneath the soft resonance of her skin. "You're injured." Reese glanced at his arm and shrugged. "I've had worse after bar fights in the Proxima system. This is just a souvenir from my rather ungraceful landing." He looked back at his damaged ship and sighed. "Though I can't say the same for my ship. She's in rough shape." Alara followed his gaze. Even to her untrained eye, the vessel appeared severely damaged. The navigation system was likely destroyed, and the hull had been breached in multiple places. Emergency sealant foam had deployed, preventing catastrophic decompression, but the ship wouldn't fly again without significant repairs. "You're stranded here," she stated simply. Reese ran his hand through his disheveled hair. "Seems that way. Any chance this ghost station has a functioning communications array? Or better yet, a spare shuttle?" Alara shook her head. "Communications have been dead for years. There was a shuttle bay, but—" She trailed off, remembering the massive hull breach that had rendered that section inaccessible. "It's gone." "Perfect," Reese muttered. He looked around the dimly lit corridor, then back at Alara. "So, it's just you here? How long have you been alone?" The question sent an unexpected pang through Alara. Her skin resonated with a melancholy tone. "I don't keep track anymore," she admitted. "Years, I think." Reese's expression softened. "Well, looks like you've got company now, at least until I can get my ship operational again." He attempted to take a step toward her, but staggered slightly. Without thinking, Alara moved forward to steady him, then immediately pulled back, afraid her touch would frighten him once he felt the vibration of her resonance directly. But Reese didn't flinch. "Thanks," he said simply. "I might need to sit down for a minute." "There's a habitat section nearby," Alara offered hesitantly. "It has heat and oxygen recycling." "Lead the way," Reese said with a nod. "And maybe while we walk, you can tell me why you think people would be afraid of something as fascinating as your echoes? Is that what you called them?" Alara glanced at him, uncertain. No one had ever described her resonance as fascinating before. Usually, the words were more along the lines of disturbing or unnatural. As they walked slowly through the dim corridors of Obsidian Drift, Alara wondered if perhaps this unexpected visitor was simply in shock, his fear temporarily masked by trauma. Soon enough, she thought, he would show his true reaction. But for now, she would guide him to safety. After that, she would decide whether to help him further or retreat back into her solitary existence. After all, everyone eventually became afraid of her. Everyone. Obsidian Drift's habitat section retained vestiges of its former purpose. Though dimly lit by emergency power, the communal area still contained furniture and basic amenities. Alara had made this her primary living space, adding small touches to make it less austere. Salvaged fabric draped over harsh metal edges, a collection of unusual space debris arranged in artistic patterns, and several thriving plants. Anomalies she had discovered adapting to the low light conditions in an abandoned hydroponics bay. Reese sank gratefully onto a bench, examining his surroundings with undisguised curiosity. "You've made quite a home here," he observed. "Cozy, in a post-apocalyptic sort of way." Alara handed him a container of water from her supplies, maintaining a careful distance. Her crystalline patterns pulsed with nervous energy, creating a soft, irregular chiming that filled the otherwise quiet room. "Thank you," Reese said, accepting the water. After taking a long drink, he continued, "So about your ship, I'm guessing it needs significant repairs." "Beyond significant," Reese confirmed grimly. "The main propulsion system is fried, navigation computer is toast, and I'm missing critical components I need to cobble together even basic flight capability." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I don't suppose this station has a fully stocked spaceship repair shop hidden away somewhere. Alara's patterns dimmed slightly. No, but there are storage areas. Old equipment. Parts from the station's maintenance systems might be compatible with modifications. Reese perked up. That's something at least. I'm pretty good at improvising repairs, but I don't know much about this station's energy systems. I do, Alara said quietly. I've had to learn to maintain the basic functions to survive here. Then it seems we need each other, Reese said, meeting her gaze directly. I can't fix my ship without your knowledge of the station, and you. He paused. And I what? Alara asked, her resonance intensifying slightly with curiosity. Reese shrugged. I don't know yet. Maybe you could use some company after all this time alone. Or maybe you just want to help me leave. As quickly as possible, so you can go back to your solitude. He gave her a questioning look. Which is it? The directness of his question caught Alara off guard. Her patterns flashed brightly for a moment, filling the room with a cascade of delicate sounds. It was true. Part of her desperately craved connection after years of isolation, but another part feared what might happen if she allowed herself to hope. I'll help you find the parts you need, she said finally, avoiding the deeper question. In exchange, you leave when you can and tell no one I'm here. Deal. Reese agreed readily, though his eyes reflected curiosity about her conditions. When can we start looking? You should rest first, Alara said, noticing how he winced when shifting position. Your injuries are not going to fix themselves whether I sit here or walk around. Reese interrupted with a dismissive gesture. And frankly, I'd rather be doing something productive than sitting here cataloging my aches and pains. Alara studied him for a moment, then nodded. We'll need to be careful. Parts of the station are unstable. Others have no life support. I've got a portable breather in my emergency kit, Reese said, patting a small pack attached to his belt. Lead the way. As they prepared to venture deeper into the abandoned station, Alara couldn't help wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. But as Reese stood waiting, without a trace of the fear or discomfort she had come to expect, something long dormant stirred within her. A fragile hope that perhaps, just this once, someone might see beyond the resonance that had defined her existence for so long. The journey through Obsidian Drift's abandoned sections revealed the station's history in fragments, snapshots frozen in time when the original inhabitants had departed or perished. They passed through a laboratory with experiments still set up on workstations, their contents now dried or crystallized. Personal quarters contained abandoned belongings, photographs, clothing, small treasures deemed not valuable enough to take during what must have been a hasty evacuation. Reese moved through these spaces with a strange mix of reverence and practical assessment, occasionally picking up objects to examine them before setting them carefully back in place. His footsteps echoed loudly in the silence, a stark contrast to Alara's nearly soundless movements, accompanied only by the soft chiming of her crystalline patterns. What happened here? Reese asked as they entered what had once been a mess hall, tables still arranged in neat rows, some with trays and utensils left behind. I don't know exactly, Alara admitted. The station was abandoned before I arrived. There are no records of evacuation orders or emergencies. Just emptiness. Creepy, Reese muttered, like everyone just vanished in the middle of their daily lives. Alara nodded. The mystery of Obsidian Drift's abandonment had troubled her during her early days here, but eventually, the question had faded into the background of her existence. Survival had taken precedence over archaeology. They continued through a series of corridors until reaching a large storage bay. Shelving units stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with equipment, spare parts, and containers of various sizes. This looks promising, Reese said, his eyes scanning the inventory with growing excitement. He moved immediately to a section containing what appeared to be engine components, examining each piece with expert hands. Alara watched him work, fascinated by his confidence and focus. Her kind were not known for mechanical aptitude. Their strengths lay in energy manipulation and resonance sensitivity. Observing Reese's methodical examination of the parts was like watching an unfamiliar dance. These might work, he muttered, setting aside several components. with some modification, and if we can find a power regulator compatible with my ship's systems. Power regulators would be in the central energy core, Ilarith said hesitantly. But that area is unstable. Reese looked up, catching the concern in her voice. Define unstable. The station's core reactor was never fully decommissioned. It operates at minimal capacity to maintain basic life support in certain sections. But the containment systems are deteriorating. There are energy leaks, structural weaknesses. Sounds like a party, Reese said dryly. But if that's where we need to go to find a compatible regulator. It's dangerous, Ilara emphasized, her patterns flashing with worry, creating a discordant melody. Even for me, and I can sense energy fluctuations. Reese paused his examination of the parts and looked at her carefully. You can sense energy? Is that related to your... He gestured vaguely at her glowing skin. Ilara nodded. The crystalline patterns are sensitive to energy fields. They respond with resonance. It's how I've navigated the unstable sections safely. She hesitated, then added, it's also part of why others fear me. They believe the resonance affects their minds, or brings misfortune. Does it affect minds? Reese asked, his tone merely curious, not accusatory. No, Alaris said firmly. It's just sound and light. Harmless. She didn't mention that in moments of extreme stress or danger, the resonance could be much more than that. He'd need to know. Not yet. Reese nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. Then your ability sounds like exactly what we need to navigate this energy core safely. He gathered the salvageable parts into a makeshift carrier fashioned from empty storage containers. Shall we? Ilara hesitated. She had avoided the energy core for months, ever since the last major fluctuation had nearly trapped her inside. But without the power regulator, Reese's ship would never fly again. We should prepare first, she said reluctantly. We'll need protection against radiation and tools to extract the regulator quickly. Now you're talking like a proper space scavenger, Reese said with approval. Lead on, my crystalline guide. The unexpected description made Ilara's patterns pulse with something unfamiliar, a warm, pleasant resonance that surprised her with its intensity. She quickly turned away, uncomfortable with this new sensation and what it might mean. As they gathered supplies for their venture to the core, Ilara found herself stealing glances at Reese. His continued lack of fear or discomfort around her resonance was puzzling. Perhaps humans were simply less sensitive to it than other species she had encountered. Or perhaps Reese was uniquely different. Either way, she reminded herself it was temporary. Once his ship was repaired, he would leave, and she would be alone again, with only the echoing silence of obsidian drift for company. The journey to the station's energy core took them through increasingly deteriorated sections. Emergency lighting flickered erratically, casting strange shadows across their path. The ambient temperature dropped noticeably, and their breath formed visible clouds in the cold air. Reese had donned a salvaged radiation suit, modified to fit his human frame. Ilara wore a lighter protective covering, her natural resistance to radiation requiring less shielding. They communicated through short-range communicators built into their helmets. The structural integrity gets worse from here, Ilara warned as they approached a junction where the metal floors were visibly warped. We'll need to be careful where we step. Reese nodded, his face serious behind his helmet visor. The jovial attitude he had maintained earlier had given way to focused concentration. How much farther to the core section? 2 more junctions, then down a maintenance shaft, Ilara replied. I can feel the energy fluctuations already. Her crystalline patterns were responding to the proximity of the core, pulsing with a slow, steady rhythm visible even through her protective clothing. They proceeded cautiously, testing each step before committing their weight. Twice they had to backtrack and find alternate routes when passages proved impassable due to collapsed ceilings or buckled floors. As they drew closer to the core, the station's ambient sounds changed. The distant hum of minimal life support systems was gradually overtaken by an irregular throbbing, the struggling heart of Obsidian Drift's power source. That doesn't sound healthy, Reese commented, pausing to listen. How long has it been making that noise? It's worse than before, Ilera admitted, concern evident in her voice. The fluctuations are more pronounced. Her patterns were now pulsing rapidly, creating an urgent melody that filled their helmets through the communication system. Your echo is getting stronger, Reese observed. Is that normal when you're near energy sources? Ilera nodded. The patterns respond to energy fields. The stronger the field, the more intense the resonance. Useful early warning system, Reese said appreciatively. Like a canary in a coal mine, but prettier. Before Ilera could ask what a canary was, a sudden violent tremor shook the corridor. Metal groaned around them, and dust showered from the ceiling. Move! Ilera shouted, her instincts flaring. Energy spike. They broke into a run, navigating the deteriorating passage as quickly as safety allowed. Behind them, a section of ceiling collapsed with a thunderous crash. The tremors continued, increasing in intensity. What's happening? Reese shouted over the din. Core instability, Ilera called back, her patterns now flashing urgently, filling their helmets with crystalline warnings. It's building toward a discharge. We need to reach the maintenance shaft before. A blinding flash of energy surged through the corridor, racing along the metal walls like lightning. Ilera felt it coming microseconds before it appeared, the energy field setting her patterns into a frenzy of warning resonance. Down, she cried, tackling Reese to the floor just as the energy surge passed overhead, leaving the air crackling and the smell of ozone filtering through their helmet systems. Reese grunted as they hit the floor, but immediately rolled them both toward a recessed doorway, seeking shelter from potential falling debris. Thanks, he gasped. How did you know it was coming? I felt it, Ilera said simply, her patterns still pulsing rapidly with alarm. The energy buildup creates a disturbance I can sense through my resonance. Definitely not something to be afraid of, Reese muttered. That just saved our lives. They remained crouched in the doorway as several smaller tremors passed through the station. Gradually, the violent shaking subsided, though Ilera's patterns continued their urgent warning signal. It's not over, she cautioned. That was just a preliminary discharge. The core is still building toward something bigger. Fantastic, Reese said grimly. How much time do we have? Ilera closed her eyes, focusing on the subtle vibrations coming through the floor and walls, interpreting them through her resonance. 20 minutes, perhaps. Maybe less. Then we'd better move fast, Reese decided, checking that their salvage tools were still secure. Lead the way. They resumed their journey with new urgency, no longer testing each step, but moving with controlled haste. Ilera's patterns provided a constant status update on the energy levels around them, glowing brighter and chiming louder as they approached the maintenance shaft. The shaft itself was a narrow vertical tunnel, designed for service drones rather than humanoid maintenance workers. Rusty ladder rungs protruded from one wall, descending into darkness. This is our way down, Reese asked dubiously, peering into the shaft. It's the only access point that hasn't been sealed or destroyed, Ilera confirmed. The core chamber is approximately 30 meters below us. Reese adjusted his tool pack and gripped the first rung. Ladies first. Or would you prefer I test if these holds will support a human's weight? I'll go, Ilera decided. Her lighter frame would put less stress on the ancient metal. Follow carefully and test each rung. The descent was nerve-wracking. Several rungs broke free as soon as they applied pressure, clattering down the shaft into darkness. The air grew noticeably warmer as they descended, and Ilera's resonance intensified to an almost painful degree. The chiming had become a constant, urgent song that filled their helmets. Finally, they reached the bottom of the shaft. A heavy maintenance door separated them from the core chamber. Through a small observation window, Ilera could see the core itself, a massive spherical structure surrounded by control consoles and containment fields that flickered ominously. The sphere pulsed with unstable energy, casting the chamber in alternating shadows and blinding light. That doesn't look good, Reese observed, looking through the window. Where would the power regulators be? Alara pointed to a bank of equipment on the far side of the chamber. There, those are distribution notes. The regulators should be housed in those units. Reese studied the layout, then the unstable core. So we just need to cross the room with the angry energy ball, grab a regulator, and get out before everything goes boom. Simple. The containment field is failing, Alara warned. When it collapses completely, the core will discharge all its stored energy at once. That's why I'm sensing building up. How long now? Alara focused on her resonance, which was now so intense it was visible as rippling waves across her protective suit. 12 minutes. Maybe less. Let's not waste time, then, Reese said, reaching for the door control. The core chamber was a maelstrom of sensory overload. The air itself seemed charged with electricity, raising the hair on their bodies despite the protective suits. Warning alarms blared intermittently from still-functioning emergency systems. The core pulsed with increasing frequency, each throb sending waves of energy washing over them. For Alara, the experience was overwhelming. Her crystalline patterns were resonating so powerfully that the protective suit vibrated visibly. The sensation bordered on pain, but she pushed through it, focusing on their objective. They moved carefully around the perimeter of the chamber, staying as far from the core as possible. Ancient equipment and fallen debris created obstacles they had to navigate. Halfway to their destination, a massive energy surge from the core sent a control console exploding into fragments. Alara and Reese ducked behind a support column just in time to avoid the shrapnel. 8 minutes, Alara gasped, the effort of maintaining focus through the resonance overload becoming difficult. They pressed on, finally reaching the distribution nodes. Reese immediately began examining the units, looking for compatible regulators. Here, he exclaimed after a tense minute of searching. This should work with the modifications I can make. He began disconnecting the regulator, his movements quick but precise. A sudden violent surge from the core sent a discharge arcing across the chamber. It struck a conduit near them, causing it to rupture in a shower of sparks and superheated plasma. "Look out!" Alara cried, pulling Reese away from the erupting conduit. But the plasma spread rapidly across the floor, cutting off their escape route back to the maintenance door. "We're trapped," Reese realized, clutching the precious regulator. "The plasma will eat through our suits if we try to cross it." Alara looked around desperately. The core was pulsing faster now, the containment field visibly deteriorating. Her resonance had become almost unbearable, a symphony of warning that filled her entire being. 5 minutes, she managed to say through gritted teeth. Maybe less. Reese scanned the chamber frantically, looking for another exit. There, he pointed to a small service hatch on the opposite wall. Emergency evacuation route, standard in core designs of this era. But to reach it, they would have to cross directly in front of the failing core, exposing themselves to the full force of its unleashed energy. "We'll never make it," Alara said, her voice strained. "The core is about to discharge." Reese looked at her, then at the unstable energy sphere, his expression resolute behind his visor. "We have to try. On 3, we run. 1, 2. Wait," Alara interrupted, a desperate idea forming. "I can protect us, but you must not be afraid. Whatever happens, whatever you see or hear, don't panic." Reese hesitated only a moment before nodding firmly. "I trust you." The simple declaration sent a surge through Alara that had nothing to do with the failing core. She took a deep breath and deliberately released the rigid control she always maintained over her resonance. Instantly, the crystalline patterns across her body flared with blinding intensity. Her protective suit, unable to contain the energy, began to tear at the seams as the patterns extended outward, growing and multiplying. The soft chiming that had accompanied her resonance transformed into a powerful, all-encompassing symphony that filled the chamber, drowning out even the alarms. Reese staggered back, his hands instinctively rising to cover his ears inside his helmet. The sound was physically painful, vibrating through bone and tissue. The light from Alara's transformed body was equally overwhelming, creating a stroboscopic effect that disoriented and dazzled. But Alara wasn't finished. Focusing all her energy and will, she extended her hands toward the core. The crystalline patterns flowed like liquid light from her fingers, forming a translucent shield of resonating energy between them and the failing containment field. "Run," she commanded, her voice transformed, layered with harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Now!" Still dazed but responsive, Reese moved. Alara kept pace beside him, maintaining the resonance shield as they sprinted across the open space before the core. Behind them, the containment field collapsed with a sound like 1,000 thunderclaps converging. Energy exploded outward from the core, a cataclysmic wave that would have vaporized them instantly, without protection. It struck Alara's shield with devastating force, the impact sending cascades of crystalline harmonics throughout the chamber. The floor beneath them buckled and melted. Equipment exploded into shrapnel all around them. But Alara's shield held, barely. The resonance was so intense now that it manifested visibly as rippling waves of crystalline energy extending from her body. Each wave absorbed part of the core's discharge, converting it into harmonic patterns that dissipated more safely into the station structure. They reached the evacuation hatch, Reese wrenching it open while Alara maintained a shield against repeated energy surges. The moment the path was clear, they threw themselves into the narrow maintenance tunnel beyond, Reese pulling the hatch shut behind them just as another massive discharge struck. The tunnel was dark and cramped, barely wide enough for them to crawl single file. Emergency lighting strips provided minimal illumination as they frantically made their way upward, away from the catastrophic core failure. Alara's resonance was fading now, her strength nearly exhausted from the tremendous effort of maintaining the protective shield. The crystalline patterns dimmed to a faint glow, the overwhelming symphony reducing to a weak, irregular chiming. They crawled for what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, finally emerging from an access panel into a corridor several levels above the core chamber. Behind and below them, they could feel the station shuddering as the core continued its catastrophic breakdown. Once they had put sufficient distance between themselves and the failing core, they collapsed against a wall, gasping for breath. Reese removed his helmet, his face pale and sheen with sweat. Alara's protective suit had been largely destroyed by her resonance transformation, hanging in tatters around her exhausted form. She waited, bracing herself for what must inevitably come next. Now that Reese had seen the full extent of her abilities, the overwhelming, potentially harmful resonance that had driven others to fear and hate her kind, surely his attitude would change. The temporary alliance would dissolve into the familiar pattern of fear and rejection. "See," she whispered, her voice weak, the resonance now just a feeble undertone. "This is why everyone is afraid." Reese stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to Alara's astonishment, he moved toward her rather than away. Kneeling beside her slumped form, he reached out, slowly, cautiously, but without hesitation, and grasped her shoulder. "Afraid," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "I just watched you turn into a fighting wind chime and save both our lives." Amazing is the word I'd use. His eyes sought hers, concern evident in his gaze. "Are you all right? That seemed to take a lot out of you." The genuine worry in his voice, the complete absence of fear or disgust, was so unexpected that Alara could only stare in disbelief. Her patterns flickered weakly with confusion. "I don't understand," she finally managed. "You saw what I can do. What I am. The resonance at full strength, it hurts most beings. Disrupts their thoughts. It's dangerous. So is a solar flare, but that doesn't make it any less spectacular," Reese countered. He held up the power regulator they had risked their lives to retrieve. "We got what we needed. Now let's get somewhere safer before this whole section decides to follow the core into oblivion." He offered his hand to help her up, and after a moment's hesitation, Alara took it. The simple gesture, the willingness to touch her even after witnessing her resonance at its most powerful, affected her more deeply than she could express. As they made their way back toward the safer sections of the station, Alara found herself re-examining everything she had believed about her place in the universe. Perhaps there was room for someone like her after all, if there were people like Reese who could see beyond fear to the person beneath the resonance. The return to the inhabited section of Obsidian Drift was arduous. The core's catastrophic failure had triggered secondary systems collapses throughout the station. Entire corridors were now blocked by fallen debris or sealed off by emergency bulkheads. Twice they had to backtrack and find alternate routes when passages proved impassable. Alara's strength returned gradually during the journey. The crystalline patterns on her skin regained some of their luminescence. Though the resonance remained subdued, a gentle background melody rather than the overwhelming symphony it had become in the core chamber. Reese kept the power regulator secured against his chest, occasionally checking to ensure it hadn't been damaged during their escape. Despite his outward calm, Alara noticed how his hands trembled slightly and how he winced when certain movements aggravated injuries sustained during their ordeal. "We should rest," she suggested when they reached a junction that seemed relatively stable. "You're injured." Reese shook his head. "I'll rest when we're back in the safe zone. This station feels like it's coming apart at the seams." As if to confirm his assessment, a distant rumble vibrated through the floor beneath them, followed by the screech of tearing metal. "The core's discharge is causing cascade failures," Alara explained, her patterns flaring slightly with concern. The station was already structurally compromised. Now, she trailed off, not needing to state the obvious. They pressed on with renewed urgency. When they finally reached the habitat section, both collapsed onto the near-receding surface, physical and emotional exhaustion catching up with them at last. "We made it," Reese said, his voice containing equal parts disbelief and relief. "And we got the regulator. Once I recover enough brain function to remember how fingers work, I can start the repairs on my ship." Alara nodded, though a strange hollowness had formed inside her at the mention of repairs. The closer Reese came to being able to leave, the more she realized how much she dreaded returning to complete solitude. "You should treat your injuries first," she said, pushing aside the uncomfortable feelings. "There are medical supplies I've gathered from various parts of the station." While Reese cleaned and bandaged his wounds, Alara prepared a simple meal from her limited stores. They ate in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the day's events. "Thank you," Reese said finally, breaking the quiet, "for saving my life back there. I'm not sure I fully understand what you did, but it was—" He searched for the right word. "Extraordinary." Alara's patterns flickered with embarrassment, creating a soft, pleasant chime. "It's just what my kind can do. The resonance isn't only sound and light. It can manipulate energy fields, create barriers. I don't use it often because people are afraid." Reese finished for her. She nodded. "The first time I revealed the full extent of my abilities to others, they tried to capture me. They wanted to weaponize the resonance." Her patterns dimmed at the memory. "The second time, I used it to save a trading vessel from pirates. Afterward, the crew locked me in a cargo hold and debated whether to space me or sell me to researchers." "That's why you're hiding here," Reese realized. "Not just because people fear your echo, but because they want to exploit it. This station was abandoned, isolated. Perfect for someone who needed to disappear." Alara gestured around them. "It's been my sanctuary. My prison too, but at least it's one of my choosing." Reese considered her words, absently fingering the power regulator. "Well, I for one am grateful you're here and not afraid to use your abilities. Otherwise, I'd be cosmic dust right now." The simple acknowledgement meant more to Alara than she could express. Her entire life had been defined by others' fear and greed. To be valued simply for helping, with no expectation or demand, it was unfamiliar territory. "We should start work on your ship tomorrow," she said, changing the subject. "You'll need a rest first." "Agreed," Reese said, stifling a yawn. Narrowly escaping death really takes it out of you. The following days established a new rhythm to life on Obsidian Drift. Mornings began with assessing the station status. The core's catastrophic failure had triggered ongoing degradation in multiple systems, requiring Alara to make adjustments to maintain their safe haven. Afternoons were dedicated to repairing Reese's ship, a task that proved both frustrating and oddly satisfying as they worked side by side, combining his mechanical knowledge with her understanding of the station's technology. Alara found herself growing accustomed to Reese's presence, his humming as he worked, his habit of talking through problems aloud, his unexpected bursts of laughter when something went particularly right or wrong. The crystalline patterns on her skin often resonated in harmony with his voice, creating a subtle, pleasant undertone that became the soundtrack to their days. For his part, Reese seemed completely at ease with her resonance. He never flinched when it intensified unexpectedly, never complained about the constant chiming that accompanied her movements. Instead, he appeared fascinated, occasionally asking questions about how it worked or what different tones meant. "It's like a mood ring, but your entire body," he commented one day as they worked on integrating the power regulator into his ship's systems. "And infinitely more complex and beautiful." Alara's patterns had flashed brightly at the compliment, creating a cascade of crystalline notes that made Reese smile. "See? Happy sounds," he said with satisfaction. "I'm getting better at interpreting your symphony." As the days passed, Alara found herself using her resonance more freely, no longer suppressing it out of habit. She even demonstrated some of the more harmless aspects of her abilities, creating small, localized fields of crystalline energy to illuminate dark work areas or generating specific harmonic patterns to locate hairline fractures in metal components. Reese was an appreciative audience, responding with genuine wonder rather than apprehension. If people weren't so quick to fear what they don't understand, they'd see how incredible this is, he told her after watching her use resonance to fuse a delicate connection that his tools couldn't reach. On the 7th day, they encountered a major setback. The navigation system, which they had pieced together from station components and remaining parts from Reese's ship, failed catastrophically during a test sequence. "Damn it!" Reese slammed his hand against the ship's hull in frustration. "Without navigation, this fancy power regulator is just an expensive paperweight. We can't plot a course through this sector blindfolded." Alara examined the fried circuitry. "Perhaps there's a backup system somewhere on the station? The command bridge might have navigation equipment we could salvage." "Worth a try," Reese agreed, though his earlier enthusiasm had dimmed considerably. The command bridge was located in the station's upper levels, areas Alara rarely visited due to their instability. The journey there was tense, both of them acutely aware of the station's deteriorating condition. Random power surges and structural creaks punctuated their progress, obsidian drift slowly dying around them. When they finally reached the bridge, what they found exceeded expectations. Though covered in years of dust and showing signs of hasty abandonment, the command systems were largely intact. Most importantly, the navigation console, designed to plot courses for the station's long-gone shuttle fleet, appeared salvageable. "This could work," Reese said, excitement returning to his voice as he examined the equipment. "We need to remove the entire module and adapt it, but the base technology is compatible." As they carefully disconnected the navigation system, Alara found a small object that had fallen behind the console, a crystal pendant on a tarnished chain. She held it up, watching how it caught the emergency lighting. "Beautiful," Reese commented, pausing in his work. "Probably belonged to a bridge officer." Alara nodded, feeling a strange connection to this small, abandoned treasure. It reminded her of her own crystalline nature, yet it had been worn as an adornment, something valued rather than feared. Reese must have followed her thoughts because he said quietly, "You should keep it. Seems fitting somehow." She slipped the pendant into a pocket, unexpectedly touched by the gesture. Together, they carefully extracted the navigation module and began the journey back to the habitat section. That evening, as they shared a meal after successfully installing the navigation system, Reese grew uncharacteristically quiet. Alara sensed his mood shift, her patterns responding with a questioning melody. "What is it?" she finally asked. Reese met her gaze directly. "The ship's almost ready. Another day, maybe 2, and all systems should be operational." "That's good," Alara said, even as the hollow feeling inside her expanded. She had known this moment would come, had prepared for it from the beginning. Yet somehow, the reality was harder than she had anticipated. "Alara," Rhys said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "Come with me." The words hung in the air between them, startling in their simplicity and implication. Alara's patterns flared with surprise, filling the room with a complex melody of conflicting emotions. "What?" she managed to say, certain she had misunderstood. "Come with me," Rhys repeated, leaning forward. "When I leave this station, come with me." "I can't," she said automatically, the response conditioned by years of experience. "Out there, I'm a curiosity at best, a threat at worst. Here, I'm safe. Safe and alone," Rhys countered gently. "Is that really living?" The question struck deep, piercing defenses Alara hadn't realized she'd built. Was this existence, this endless cycle of survival in an empty, dying station, truly living? Or was it merely avoiding death? "Where would we go?" she asked, allowing herself to consider the possibility, if only for a moment. "Where could someone like me exist without fear?" "I don't know exactly," Rhys admitted. "I'm not going to promise you some utopia. My life is complicated, often messy. There are people after me for debts I can't pay, jobs I didn't complete to satisfaction." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "But there are places, frontier outposts, independent colonies, stations not under Alliance control, where difference is more tolerated. Where you might find a place. Where we might find a place," Alara corrected softly, her resonance creating a gentle harmony that reflected the tentative hope blossoming inside her. Rhys smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Yes, where we might find a place." He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise you won't be alone anymore." Alara looked at his outstretched hand, then back to his face, open, honest, unafraid. In that moment, she made her decision. She extended her hand, her crystalline patterns glowing softly as she placed her palm against his. The resonance created a warm, gentle vibration where their skin touched. "Yes," she said simply. The final preparations for departure took on new meaning with Alara's decision to leave. What had been merely repairs to Rhys's ship became preparations for their joint escape. Each system check, each component test, brought them closer to an uncertain future together. Alara gathered the few possessions she wanted to take, practical items mostly, though she also carefully packed the crystal pendant found on the bridge. It seemed appropriate that this small treasure, abandoned like the station itself, would journey with her into a new life. On what would be their final night on Obsidian Drift, they shared a meal that felt like a celebration despite its simplicity. Rhys had discovered a forgotten cache of preserved fruits in a storage locker, a luxurious addition to their usual fare. "To new beginnings," he said, raising a container of recycled water in a mock toast. Alara mimicked the gesture, her resonance creating a joyful chime that made them both smile. The uncertainty of what lay ahead still frightened her, but for the first time in years, fear wasn't the dominant emotion shaping her decisions. Their comfortable moment was shattered by a sudden, violent tremor that shook the entire habitat section. Lights flickered, and distant alarms began to sound. "What was that?" Rhys asked, instantly alert. Alara's patterns flared with warning, sensing a massive energy disturbance rippling through the station. "Aftershock from the core collapse," she said grimly. "The structural integrity is failing faster than I anticipated." Another tremor, stronger than the first, sent objects tumbling from shelves. A support beam creaked ominously above them. "We need to leave," Rhys decided instantly. "Now, the ship's ready enough. We can finish the minor adjustments in orbit." Alara nodded, her resonance intensifying with urgency. They grabbed their prepared bags and ran for the docking bay where Rhys's repaired vessel waited. The journey through the station became increasingly perilous as more tremors struck. Twice they had to find alternate routes when corridors collapsed ahead of them. Alara's resonance provided vital warnings, her crystalline patterns flashing seconds before each new structural failure, giving them precious time to seek cover. When they finally reached the docking bay, a new complication presented itself. Reese's ship, once securely moored, had shifted during the tremors. The gangway connecting it to the station had partially collapsed, leaving a precarious gap that would need to be jumped. "I'll go first," Reese said, calculating the distance. "Start the pre-launch sequence, then help you across." Alara nodded, watching anxiously as he backed up to get a running start. Reese sprinted forward and leapt across the gap, landing heavily but safely on the ship's entry platform. He disappeared inside, and moments later, the vessel hummed to life. Another violent tremor shook the station, widening the gap noticeably. Alara's patterns flashed in alarm. The next jump would be considerably more difficult. Reese reappeared at the ship's hatch. "Hurry," he called. "The station's breaking up faster than expected." Alara took a deep breath, backed up, and ran toward the edge. Just as she prepared to jump, a massive shudder ran through the docking bay. The floor beneath her buckled, throwing off her timing. She leapt anyway, knowing it was now or never. She fell short, her body slamming into the edge of the entry platform. Pain exploded through her as she scrambled for purchase, her fingers finding a seam in the metal plating. Below her, the docking bay floor had completely given way, revealing the infinite darkness of space. "Alara!" Reese was there instantly, reaching down to grasp her arms. "I've got you." Her patterns flared with panic and effort as he pulled her up onto the platform. The moment she was secure, he slammed his hand on the hatch control, sealing the ship against the station's decompression. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, helping her to the cockpit. "Nothing serious," she assured him, though her body ached from the impact. "We need to get clear of the station before it completely fails." Reese nodded grimly, taking the pilot's seat. His hands flew over the controls, bringing all systems online. The ship shuddered as the magnetic clamps released, freeing them from Obsidian Drift's dying embrace. Thrusters engaged, pushing them away from the docking bay, just as another section of the station collapsed inward. Through the viewport, they watched as Obsidian Drift began to break apart in earnest, structural failures cascading through the ancient facility. "Hold on," Reese warned as he increased power to the main engines. "This might get bumpy." The ship lurched forward, accelerating away from the disintegrating station. Debris from the collapse created a hazardous field they needed to navigate. Reese's piloting skills tested to their limits as he weaved through the chaos. A massive explosion behind them signaled the final catastrophic failure of the station's remaining systems. The shockwave hit them seconds later, sending the ship tumbling end over end despite Reese's desperate attempts to maintain control. Warning lights flashed across the console. Something had been damaged in their escape, possibly the newly installed navigation system, if the blinking indicators were any guide. "Can you sense which direction is safe?" Reese asked urgently, fighting to stabilize their trajectory. "We've lost directional guidance." Alara closed her eyes, extending her awareness through her resonance. The crystalline patterns on her skin intensified, glowing brightly as she searched for energy signatures that might indicate danger or safety. "There," she said finally, pointing slightly to port. "That direction feels clearest." The debris field thins out approximately 40 degrees to our current heading. Reese adjusted course immediately, trusting her senses without hesitation. Gradually, the ship's wild tumbling ceased as they cleared the worst of the danger zone. Behind them, Obsidian Drift was now just scattered fragments orbiting the dim red dwarf, its existence as a unified structure erased forever. When they finally achieved a stable course, Reese engaged the autopilot and slumped back in his seat, exhaustion overtaking him. "That was too close," he muttered. Alara nodded, her own resonance quieting as the immediate danger passed. She stared out the viewport at the star field now visible, more stars than she had seen in years from the limited viewports of Obsidian Drift. "It's gone," she said softly. "My sanctuary. My prison." Reese turned to look at her. "Regrets?" She considered the question seriously. The station had been her home, her safe haven for so long. Its loss should have devastated her. Yet strangely, she felt something closer to liberation than grief. No, she answered finally. It served its purpose. It kept me safe when I needed safety. It brought you to me when I needed. She hesitated, searching for the right word. Hope, Reese suggested gently. Her patterns chimed in agreement, a sound that had become familiar to both of them. Yes, hope. So, Reese said, gesturing toward the stars spread before them. Where to now, my crystalline navigator? The ship's damaged, but functional. We've got enough supplies to reach several possible destinations. He pulled up a star chart on the console. There's a trading outpost in the Nomad cluster, or we could try for Haven Station in the Outer Rim. Both places are known for their flexible attitudes toward unusual visitors. Alara studied the map, considering their options. The universe suddenly seemed vast and full of possibilities rather than threats. Perhaps there was a place for someone like her after all, someone whose difference had been seen as beautiful rather than frightening, as valuable rather than dangerous. The Nomad cluster, she decided. I've heard stories of other crystalline species trading there. Nomad cluster it is, Reese confirmed, setting the course as best he could with their damaged navigation. It'll take about 12 days at our current speed. 12 days, Alara repeated, her resonance creating a thoughtful melody. We'll need to repair the navigation system properly before we arrive. Among other things, Reese agreed, gesturing to the blinking warning lights. Looks like we'll have plenty to keep us busy. He reached across the space between their seats, his hand open and waiting. Alara placed her palm against his without hesitation, her crystalline patterns pulsing with a warm, gentle light. You know, Reese said, watching the prismatic reflections dance across the cockpit. I never thought I'd say this to anyone, but I'm actually glad my ship crashed. Alara's resonance rang with surprised laughter, a sound that filled the small cockpit with crystalline joy. That makes two of us, she admitted. Outside the viewport, stars streaked by as the ship carried them toward an uncertain future. But for the first time in her memory, uncertainty didn't equate to fear. Whatever challenges awaited them in the Nomad cluster or beyond, they would face them together. The human who wasn't afraid and the crystalline alien who had finally found someone who saw beauty in her difference. As Alara watched the starfield, a soft, melodious resonance emanated from her skin. Not the warning chime of danger or the muted tones of suppressed emotion, but a clear, strong symphony of possibility. Reese smiled at the sound, now as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. I'm not afraid anymore, Alara said softly, echoing her decision from days before. The words felt like a promise, a declaration, a beginning. Reese squeezed her hand gently, careful not to disturb the resonance patterns flowing across her skin. Good, he said simply. Neither am I.